Greetings from the wonderful city of Brighton. Welcome to Sound Advice and what is going to be a special episode. I am here at the Great Escape Festival and Conference. I've got an amazing few days planned. I'm here as part of the Elevate programme that the festival run, and that's alongside Arts Council England. So they have put me up here in this lovely hotel room, and I'm going to be sort of following a schedule that they've put together for me and going to a couple of like panels, some networking events, stuff like that. I thought it'd be good to bring you guys along for the ride, I guess, and sort of, like I did with the Sound City episode last week, give a little bit of an insight into what goes on at these conferences, what the major talking points are in the industry at the moment. And so yeah, I've literally just got here. I'm going to chill for a bit before meeting some of the delegates and stuff, but I think I'm going to try and like do a sort of little nightly debrief and stuff like that, and talk about some of the things that I found interesting from the conference and some of the bands and artists that I see at the festival. There's so many good people on the lineup this year that I'm excited to see, likes of West Side Cowboy, Ugly, who I saw just a week ago, but I'm going to definitely see again because they were fantastic. Love Cat, there's so many great artists, but there's also so many that I don't know about yet and that I'm excited to find out about, sort of whilst wandering around, hitting up some different venues, and yeah, seeing some of the best new talent in the UK and around the world. They all seem to descend on Brighton this weekend every single year, so I'm really excited, and yeah, hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning from a bit of a cloudy Brighton today, actually. It was gorgeous yesterday, but not quite got the weather today. Now, last night I got in at about 3, but most of the stuff I was doing was to do with the Elevate programme that I'm on. Went for a meal, not particularly something that I sort of would want to put into the episode, because it's more just sort of getting to know the people that I'm going to be doing this sort of programme with. So yeah, that was really nice though. We went for a meal at Pete's Pilgrims, which was lovely, but today we've got more of like the panels and bands and stuff like that, so I'm going to be reporting on that. Wednesday is now officially the first day of the Great Escape because they have music on, but I think really the conference, and it still feels like the full event of the Great Escape properly, I guess, starts on Thursday. And on the Wednesday, it was the day that I travelled down and met up with some of the Elevate people who were already nice. But Thursday is the first sort of day of full-on sort of conferencing, festivaling. I didn't even see any bands on the Wednesday. I was going to, but there were a lot of queues and I was pretty exhausted from the travelling, to be honest. But yeah, Thursday was the first sort of proper day where I got to do a load of different things, meet a lot of interesting people, and I thought I'd want to share my experiences. So the first thing I went to was a panel from the Council of Music Makers, which is a sort of variety of different people. They had like an information sheet, and it is the CMM, the Council of Music Makers. It's the Ivors Academy, the FAC, which is sort of the Featured Artists Coalition, the MMF, which is the Music Managers Forum, the Music Producers Guild, and the Musicians Union. And they sort of did a panel which was kind of a whistle-stop tour of different issues in the music industry. I guess the Council of Music Makers' role really is there's all these different organisations representing different people. So the Ivors Academy representing songwriters, Featured Artists Coalition for artists, Music Managers Forum for managers, Music Producers Guild for producers, and Musicians Union more for musicians in general. So that includes artists and sort of session musicians and things like that. So they sort of have this combined voice to be able to sort of give them a greater presence, whether it's talking to people in Parliament or just advocating for change in general. So they sort of came together, and it was different people from within those organisations on this panel, kind of giving a whistle-stop tour of a few different issues. So the first one was music streaming, where they were talking about some of the changes that they're sort of encouraging. So for example, the Musicians Union are keen for changes to be made so that session musicians get paid for streaming, because at the moment there's no remuneration for session musicians when a song is streamed on Spotify or Apple Music. There is on radio, which has been sort of a long established system, but lady from the Musicians Union described someone who was a session musician on Back to Black by Amy Winehouse and got 40 quid for the session, and through streaming hasn't seen another penny since. So obviously streaming's been a big debate for a long time, and it sort of felt a little bit for a long time like you're sort of shouting into an empty void about the fact that artists want to be sort of paid more, the session musicians want to be paid in general and things like that. But it feels like there is sort of finally change that's starting to be made. There's a government-led work to address music maker remuneration has been slow but is now progressing, and I think from what the panel was saying, the new Labour government seems to be a lot more receptive to making these changes than the previous Conservative government, so that's definitely a positive thing. One of the biggest topics from this one was AI, and something that I thought was really interesting is that they basically said that AI companies in general haven't really tried to engage with them yet on an individual or on a collective level, and that there's obviously the UK government and governments and organisations around the world are keen to encourage AI because there's a massive growth opportunity there, to grow the economy, to grow new businesses in the UK, and a lot of people are sort of trying to incentivise AI, new AI work to be done. But what that's coming at the cost of is a fair understanding of the industries that already exist, like music, where data has been essentially scraped and artists haven't had the opportunity to get paid for that or to even give consent for that. Now, I believe there is something in practice now where there is a way to opt out, but firstly, that is if your music or whatever you have that's copyrighted hasn't already been put into the system. And secondly, apparently it's some sort of complex piece of code that you can put into something. So it doesn't seem like a good system. And I think as much as AI is a great opportunity for growth and a great opportunity for growth in music as well, I mean, I think sometimes musicians are very sort of naturally skeptical of it, but it's important to embrace new technologies. And there's a lot of areas where AI can be really useful. I've done an episode of the podcast before with Alex Keita, who's an AI consultant, and they talk about the ways that they use it to create art themselves, because they do I think it was like poetry or stuff like that that Alex is interested in making, and but also things like to cover some of your admin, to help you send emails to bookers, that kind of thing. And to be honest, I use tools like ChatGPT, not loads, but like a decent amount to sort of help with writing sometimes an episode description if I'm short on time, or to come up with new episode ideas. So it's important to embrace AI, but at the same time, if copyrighted work, and we know this is true already, but if copyrighted work has already been used to train AI systems like ChatGPT and others, then you have to get a consent for that, because you can't just evade copyright law just because it's a new technology and it's an emerging area. And I think that, and I don't have a comprehensive understanding of how AI works, but if they've scraped all the stuff from without getting consent, these companies have to go back and get consent from artists, from writers, from anyone who's ever done any original work that can be copyrighted. And if they can't, and I've heard sort of the case before that that's not possible to do within the system. It's not possible to just go back and sort of pick bits out, because it's almost like all this copyrighted content has been poured into this big jar and stirred around. But if that's the case, then I think, and I don't see this happening, but I think governments need to tell them that they will have to start from scratch, because they can't keep using copyrighted material and not firstly gaining consent from artists, but secondly, I think a fairer system, and especially when AI does have such massive growth potential and it will make a lot of money, and it already is making a lot of money, that beyond just consent, the artists should be paid for their work, and that there should be some kind of system where if an AI system produces, say like an AI music generation software, produces the song, and one of the bits that it sort of takes as an example, because I know it generates it on its own back, but one of the things that it takes as an example is your music, then you get a payment of that, like a bit like a Spotify stream, or some sort of system like that, where artists could be paid for the work if they want it to be featured in there, but also that every artist, especially if they're incredibly against it, has the opportunity to say, no, you can't use my copyright to train your system. So I thought that was really interesting. And they also talked about this. There was a big AI consultation that went out a few months ago, and that apparently there were 13,000 responses, which is the most responses that any government consultation has had since the smoking ban. So it's clearly an issue that people up and down the country really do care about, and a lot of artists in particular care about, because I know there have been a lot of campaigns around protecting copyright within the AI space. They also talked about live music and sort of the cost of touring crisis. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that they said that, look, grassroots venues and tours and things have always sort of operated on a sort of break even, if that, basis, and almost like a slight acceptance of it, which I understand might not sound good, but I think the understanding that grassroots venues need to be funded because of the value that they have higher up the chain, in terms of not only sort of giving artists their first opportunities, but giving sound techs their first opportunities, giving promoters their first opportunities. So the idea that it's not a particularly profitable business, but one that should be supported financially from the top, and because of the value that it provides to them. And I think that's what we're seeing with the Music Venue Trust £1 levy and things like that. So I sort of understand that true grassroots, small venue shows are not enormously profitable, and that almost like that's somewhat okay because they need to be funded in the first place. But the thing that I thought was interesting is that apparently now more than ever, mid-tier sort of tours are struggling, and it's a real problem because there are a lot of artists, particularly genre-wise, that if you're not a sort of pop artist or maybe a rock artist or a rapper or something like that, if you were part of a genre like jazz, for example, or heavy metal or something like that, those bands don't tend to enter sort of the mainstream and enter the sort of top tier of gigs. I'm talking sort of O2 arenas and stadium tour type artists. So if you don't if mid-tier touring isn't financially sustainable, then that is a huge problem for those artists and those genres, as well as just all the amazing artists in maybe those more mainstream genres that, in theory, with being able to tour sort of mid-tier venues, and for that I'm sort of thinking 500 to 5,000 ish is what I would probably call mid-tier. There's probably a better definition of that than mine there, but yeah, sort of definitely above 500 as the sort of lower threshold. Those artists of that level, if they can't make an income from streaming and they can't make an income from touring, then how will they ever be able to go beyond that level and reach the sort of upper tier? And it's interesting because there was a lot of, in the episode I did about Sound City, which if you haven't seen, I would recommend checking out. It's sort of similar to this, but about Liverpool Sound City. There was a lot of talk about creating ways to export artists, so to get their music out into the US and into other markets, into Europe and things like that. But if artists can't sort of sustain themselves at the mid-tier and sort of be able to go full-time in that way, then it becomes very difficult for artists to get big enough to be able to build an audience in those markets anyway. So whilst I'm really interested in the exporting sort of conversation, I think there maybe needs to be a look at sort of one level below that into, well, if artists can't sustain themselves and build a full-time career touring big, like decent sized venues that sell a lot of tickets, because the costs of everything has gone up, because the costs of especially touring in the EU have gone up, and the amount of paperwork. And someone was saying about the fact that a lot of the time a truck can only stop, truck from the UK can only stop in 3 places in the EU. So a lot of people then have to get a truck to Europe and then hire a truck in Europe and then send the other truck. And there's all these sort of logistical nightmares really that make it really difficult for UK artists to tour successfully in Europe. And that's why I think the proposals, I know the Liberal Democrats were really keen on this, and I think Labour are somewhat keen on it as well, about EU touring, special EU touring visas for artists that are a lot less complicated and that allow free movement and allow people to work in a much easier way in Europe, because it's ever since Brexit, it's been a massive problem for artists touring around the EU. And beyond that, just the costs of things like accommodation and transport and food and everything really that has made costs of touring, whether in Europe or just in the UK, massively go up, is definitely causing a massive problem for mid-tier touring artists. After that, I had a couple of meetings and I did a sort of speed networking session that the Elevate program had set up for us, which was really great. And then I went to my second panel of the day, which was focused on artist development with people from Believe Music and someone from Fabric Records, which is I believe a local record label in Brighton. And this panel had a lot of fairly similar themes really, in the sense that one of the people on the panel from Believe was based in Paris and was talking about the fact that it seems to be a lot harder for UK artists to really break out and export and cut through the noise at the moment. And that a big part of that is just sort of some of the Brexit sort of complications, but also just the fact that nationally in the UK, we seem to be losing our national identity in terms of music a little bit, in the sense that I can't remember the exact percentages he said, but it was something like in France, 70 to 80% of the chart is French music that was made in France. And that in the UK, it's about 30% British music. Now, I think Britain has a real problem here because obviously being an English-speaking country, there's natural sort of competition with American artists. But this didn't used to seem to be as big of a problem as it is now. And I think there's a real sense, I know Elijah wrote about this before, that I think that radio is sort of a big part of this, and that radio used to play a very important role in highlighting local artists, British artists, and sort of presenting their work to a wider audience in the UK. And that now it seems to have become a lot more centralized, maybe as they lose listenership, as radio sort of takes a bit of a downturn, that they increasingly go with what's sort of the most popular, as opposed to sort of trying to introduce audiences to different things, to new music from the UK, and sort of, I guess, sort of just playing whatever is popular, and whatever's popular online and things like that may well be music from the States. So I think there's definitely a real problem there, and I would love to see personally, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this, but I would love to see something, because I think sometimes people underestimate the role that radio still has. Like, it's easy to think that no one listens to the radio anymore, blah, blah, blah. But there's so many people every day who, if they drive, listen to the radio in the car. I sort of personally am a big user of like the BBC Sounds app to listen to Six Music, whether that's live or in some of the mixtapes and sort of previous broadcasts that you can listen to, which is another feature that's sort of bringing radio almost slightly into the sort of podcasting space, I guess, and giving people that more accessible way of listening, being able to choose their own time when they want to listen, being able to skip ahead if they don't like a song. But I would love to see radio or some kind of policy around it setting a sort of minimum sort of quota, I suppose, of sort of British music to be played on the radio. And to be clear, like British music, I would be very sort of loose with that definition. This has got nothing to do with some of the horrible sort of immigration rhetoric or anything like that. This would be anyone who was either born in the UK or lives in the UK or works in the UK is sort of eligible for this. This isn't some kind of British passport thing. But I think it's important to sort of highlight what's going on within your own country and within the different regional scenes as well. It'd be great to see stations like Six Music have a sort of bring some of their introducing DJs from the local shows. So like BBC Industries in Kent with Abby McCarthy, and Dave Monk's in Liverpool, and all those different. It'd be great to see some of those shows get spotlighted on Six Music and sort of say, well, this is what's going on in Liverpool, this is what's going on in Manchester, in Kent, in London, all those kind of things. So yeah, I would love to see more emphasis from radio on highlighting some of the amazing artists that we have in this country, because there's not a lack of amazing artists. I mean, you just have to look around this festival, and I'll talk about some of the people that I saw later, but there's clearly an abundance of talent, but it just needs an opportunity to be heard and brought to a wider audience. Another thing that I think is interesting is just how much Believe is growing as a label. So they said that at this festival, they have 135 acts playing at the festival are Believe acts. And that is a huge number. I think it's about a quarter of to a third of the festival, which is more than any other label or label organization has. And I think the thing that it really made me think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I really got the sense that within the next 5 to 10 years, the way that Belief have grown, the way that they've sort of worked smartly to acquire companies like Centric, based in Liverpool, to do sort of publishing stuff, and TuneCore, in terms of that sort of DIY distribution, so that it almost creates a little bit of an AWOL model. Where AWOL used to always have sort of a bottom tier where you could just upload your music, and then sort of higher tiers where they would sort of pick out some of the best artists who are using their lower tier platform. And I guess that would be a similar thing with Believe, where they sort of, through owning TuneCore, they sort of have first dibs, or like the first opportunity to hear music from some of the sort of DIY artists who are just uploading it themselves through TuneCore. But I think within the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and this is similar to AWOL, I suppose, and how a lot of people may have felt about AWOL at the time, that there seems like an inevitability that Believe will either become almost one of the majors and sort of add sort of a fourth spot alongside Warner, Sony, and Universal to be a sort of another major label of sorts, or that one of the major labels will acquire Believe, as we've seen so many times, like with AWOL, who I believe were bought by Sony, I think. But I think to be honest, I think a lot of people would agree with this. I think it would be good to see the continued rise of Believe, because I think more competition is always a good thing, and you essentially do have an oligopoly at the top with the three major labels at the moment. So any extra sort of competition or other labels that can start to compete for those artists. And I think one of the things that they said on the panel is that Believe doesn't really have sort of a superstar yet, and that's probably one of the biggest differences between them and the three major labels. But I think from what they were saying on the panel, they definitely have the intention to. So really interested to see what Believe continue to do over the next few years. After that, I went to the Northern Music Network social thing. Now, I believe that in the Sound City episode I did last week, that I called them the Northern Music Alliance, which they're not called. They're called the Northern Music Network. But it was a really nice event. Free drinks, which I never have too much to complain about. But it was really nice to see different people from different organisations based in the North sort of coming together and sort of taking a more strategic approach, I suppose, to sort of harness the power of collaboration and connection between different organisations. And obviously there are specific organisations that are part of the network, but there are also a lot of people at this event that were just making music or making music happen, whether through promotion or labels or venues and things like that are based in the north of England, sort of coming together, speaking to each other and harnessing that power of working together more, which is always going to create better opportunities. So that was really great to see. And then finally, after a really full-on day of sort of networking and meetings and panels and all sorts of stuff, I finally got to see some bands, because I didn't get to see any bands on the Wednesday, and I was so sort of busy during the day on the Thursday that it was finally time in the evening, after getting some tea, to see some amazing artists. So I started with Fuzz Lightyear at Paganini Ballroom in the Old Ship Hotel, which is a gorgeous venue. It's sort of in like it really does feel like it, I mean, probably was an old ballroom. It's still got a sort of chandelier on the roof, carpeted floors, that kind of thing. But Fuzz Lightyear were absolutely incredible. They really brought an amazing energy to the set, and I love sort of like the bassist would sort of like come to the front and sort of give this like really like sort of deadpan sort of look and sort of give like sort of no energy, and then suddenly just start like bouncing around off the walls. But they are, yeah, they're fantastic. So heavy, really expecting big things from them, especially being on a stage curated by BBC Introducing and Six Music is definitely a positive sign of big things to come. Next, I saw what I would describe as one of the talking points of the festival, really, which is that West Side Cowboy, they're playing 4 shows over the course of I keep calling it the weekend, but it's not a weekend, it's Wednesday to Saturday. Anyway, they're playing, so they played a show on Wednesday night, which I sort of had a look, tried to get into. Queue was enormous, I was tired, didn't bother. And then yesterday, I was planning to see them at their 7:15 start at Paganini Ballroom, and again, the queue was absolutely enormous. And everyone that I've sort of spoken to about them has been like, oh yeah, no one is getting into their gigs at all. The queues are insane. They are packing out every room that they're playing. And they're clearly a band that have a lot of hype around them. I mean, they're still very new. They're only sort of 2 songs in, but already they are, signed to Nice Swan Records. They are touring with Black Country New Road. They are doing, I think that's a European tour as well. They are doing amazing things. They're getting covered in all sorts of different press outlets and championed by Emily Pilbeam's amazing Introducing show on 6. And so I was really determined. Even from the beginning of the weekend, they were one of the bands I really wanted to see, but having missed them twice, I sort of thought, I have to see this band. I have to try and get in. So after Fuzz Lightyear, I went straight across to Charles Street Tap, which is where they were playing. And I got there, I think, like 25 minutes early and just went straight in and sort of stood down. And even at that point, it was really busy. But by the time they were sort of doing their line checks about 10 minutes before, the entire place was packed. I didn't obviously get to see because you sort of got upstairs to it, but I assume there was a huge queue outside, as there has been for all of their other shows. But they definitely lived up to the hype. They are such a fun band, and they have a real sense of sort of joy and youth and almost like coming of age about them, I suppose, and a really unique sort of blend of sort of slightly lo-fi, sort of slacker coming of age rock type stuff, but then also with these sort of slight sort of country twangs and really melodic like verses. And they have a real sense of sort of homeliness about them. Like you can really tell that their songs were sort of written in a room together, as opposed to, sort of something that's a little bit more like manufactured in a studio or something. But every song sounded really unique. They clearly have one of the reasons I wanted to see them is that there's only 2 songs that are out right now, and I sort of wanted to see what have they sort of got to come. But from what I heard, it's only going to get better and better if you are already invested in West Side Cowboy. So definitely a band to watch if you haven't been already. Really cool set. I might go and see them again today. They're playing at the Beach Stage at like 5:15, but maybe I will, maybe I won't. But yeah, fantastic band, really fun, and looking forward to seeing more from them. Then finally, I didn't actually have to move because the next band on in Charles Street Tap were a band that I really wanted to see called Man Woman Chainsaw. Now, my phone died right before they went on, so I don't have any footage for this one, but they were very sort of frantic and chaotic whilst being sort of really tight. They're sort of, I guess I would describe them as, if you're familiar with the band Ugly, they're sort of a little bit like them, but with but probably heavier and more frantic and maybe a little bit more jazzy almost. But they were really great. I loved the electric violinist, who was just sort of in the sort of line check was sort of almost like calmly playing and sort of making sure it was in, and then as soon as the set started was just like all over the place and really bringing an amazing energy to the set. They've got a very unique sense of style. They are another band, and this is something I've been seeing a lot of recently, with multiple singers, that sort of, and not just sort of a singer with some nice backing vocals or someone who occasionally does a verse, but almost like the songs are fairly evenly distributed, but also there are some where they sing together, there are some where they harmonize, there's some where someone takes the verse, someone takes the chorus, but they were, a really fantastic band. I will say that they finished at 11:45, and I had been up since about 7:30, so by the time they were finishing up, I was pretty tired and ready to come back here, get to bed, and get refreshed for today, I suppose. So Friday at the Great Escape was definitely a lot less busy than the Thursday. Thursday was very full on, and today was a bit more focused on sort of networking stuff and sort of, networking in gigs as opposed to the more panel stuff on Thursday. I headed over to the Vivo Brunch, which is an awesome event. I went to this one of the few things I did manage to go to last year while I was, I came last year while I was working for Youth Music. So yeah, the Vivo Brunch seems to be an annual thing set in the gorgeous Brighton Beach House, Soho House setting. I'll try and find a picture and put it on the screen. But in the sunny weather, with sort of free cocktails being thrown out, I got a free scented candle, which is kind of a interesting freebie, but like I will absolutely take it. So it was really fun, in the sunshine, gorgeous setting, free drinks, and just did a bit of networking. I actually bumped into one of the people that I worked with for Youth Music last year, which was nice, and then sort of just chatted to a few different people, hopefully made some connections, hopefully some future podcast guests and stuff like that. So that was really, really fun. We went over to the Leonardo and did a little bit of we had like a sort of Elevate networking session that we did, which was cool. It was nice it was with the sort of other people on the program. So it was nice to speak to some people that I've been sort of hanging out with for the last few days, really, but sort of get to know them more in a what they do setting as opposed to like a more friend setting, which was nice. So after that, I took a little bit of a break, to be honest, because I think this conference and this festival can be, it can be very full on, to be honest. Like, especially on Thursday, I sort of had sort of panels and then meetings and then networking drinks and then all this sort of stuff like back to back to back. And you sort of have this sense, I think especially I have, because I'm sort of part of this Elevate program, I've been lucky enough to have a sort of funded place to come here and experience this, that I sort of feel, I felt this sort of overwhelming sense that I have to sort of maximize every second that I'm here, because so much of the industry is here in Brighton for these few days. There's so many great people to meet and to make connections with. But I think from speaking to other people and speaking to some of the mentors that we've had on this program, it is really important to take a break when you can as well. So yeah, I sort of came back here for a little bit, just crashed, watched a little bit of TV for like an hour, and then I headed out to a panel that I've been really excited about since it was announced, which is a sort of in conversation with Pat Nevin, the footballer and broadcaster, but avid music fan as well, and Simon Raymond from Cocteau Twins, who are one of my favourite bands ever. They're amazing. So I was really excited to sort of hear from them. And it was just sort of, they're sort of lifelong friends. I'd have been since the 80s. So it was basically just them sort of talking about, kind of just telling some of their stories, to be honest. And then Simon Raymond also was the founder of Belly Union Records, who have a load of amazing artists, including Beach House, who are one of my other favourite bands ever. So yeah, it was really nice to just hear some of their sort of stories, and I think really interesting to hear, I guess there was sort of a dichotomy in my mind between how different the music industry was in the 80s, but also how similar it still is, in the sense that, so they were talking about sort of how they all, as everyone did in the 80s, sort of was obsessed and loved John Peel and his shows on Radio 1. And so Simon Raymond was talking about how he would, before he was in Cocteau Twins, he would stand outside Radio 1 with sort of a demo on a cassette tape. And that sounds like such an alien idea now, but there's still such a prevalent sense that despite all the sort of modern tools of email and instant messaging and all this sort of stuff, that the best way by far to connect with someone and to sort of get into, whether it's like a radio presenters, to have them to sort of listen to your music or anything like that, is to still meet them in person, have a conversation with them and introduce yourself and that kind of thing. And that was sort of Simon Raymond's introduction into the industry, and it kind of drew a lot of comparisons to me of what events like this and Sound City and the other conferences in the UK are like, in the sense of meeting someone in person is just so different. And I suppose having a sort of Zoom call is a similar thing as well, because you do get sort of talk, but actually just talking to someone where you can see their face is still so important in this industry. So as much as sort of emailing sort of local radio presenters or emailing labels and stuff is still a worthwhile thing to do, it's so important if you can to get down to something like this, or to Sound City, or even to there's more and more sort of free and accessible events coming. I think like Youth Music hosts a lot of free events in different spots around the country. So yeah, and also sort of yeah, because I guess one of the reasons I started this podcast was to make events like this a little bit more accessible, put them on a sort of free online platform. And I sort of don't want to dismiss that by sort of being like, but there's nothing like being there in person. Because I think if you, and not to sort of shamelessly plug this podcast, there's other ways you can do this, but if you, hopefully the podcast is a good way to hear from some of these people and get an idea of who the people behind the scenes in the industry are that you might want to meet, or that you might want to email, because you could listen to an episode with Joe Edwards from AWOL. He's actually moved on from AWOL now, but you could listen to an episode like that and think, oh, okay, I'm going to sort of email him and ask him about this marketing campaign that I thought was interesting or something. So yeah, I'm sort of rambling a little bit here, but really enjoyed this panel. Pat Nevin had some hilarious stories. About one of them was when he was about to sign a new contract for Chelsea, and it was before the last game of the season, and the season was sort of over, but he said that he wouldn't sign a contract unless he could come off at half-time to get on a plane to see Cocteau Twins in France, which had the whole room in hysterics. It was so... He's such a sort of funny speaker as well. He's really good at telling stories. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that panel. It was one of the highlights of the conference for me. And then it was time to see some bands. So this was about 5, because I think mostly I've been doing sort of the conference stuff during the day and then the gigs during the evening. So yeah, at 5, I went up to the Inn on the Square, I believe it's called. I met up with Carl Parsons, who you may remember from the podcast episode that we did about Bandshare, which is one of his companies. He also runs a management company called A-Level Management, and they were sort of having one of the Alt Escape showcases. I should say, by the way, so the Alternative Escape, or the Alt Escape, is basically around sort of on the same days as the Great Escape, lots of other venues that aren't official venues of the Great Escape put on sort of free shows, and sort of, so companies like A-Level Management, for example, put on a showcase with a few of their bands at a venue that isn't part of the Great Escape. But one of the things that the Great Escape has done is that they've sort of, and I don't exactly know how this sort of process works, but they've really sort of embraced these events, and you can like sort of find a schedule for some of the venues on the official app, which is a really nice touch. And all these events are free, by the way. So, but you really do find a lot of people with sort of official wristbands and delegate lanyards and all that kind of stuff. You find a lot of those people still coming along to the unofficial, I suppose, events, or the Alternative Escape events. So yeah, I went to this pub called the Inn on the Square to sort of pop in and chat to him, and then I saw one of his bands that he's managing called the Raymonds, who were really fun. They were sort of like, they were very like party music vibes, which I really liked. I feel like there's not enough bands specifically creating sort of party music, because I think you've got obviously a lot of electronic music, and that's its own thing, and that's amazing. But yeah, it's so fun when you see bands that like can really like get a dance floor moving, and they were definitely one of those, sort of like a Jamiroquai sort of vibe. And the Carl was saying that the guitarist had broken his foot while trying to do a handstand, so they sort of couldn't use the wah pedal that they were planning on integrating into a lot of their songs, because he couldn't like move his foot in that way. So yeah, they were really cool. He then popped down to Chalk to see a band called the New Eves, who, this was a bit of a theme of today really, is that yesterday when I saw sort of Fuzz Lightyear, West Side Cowboy and Man Woman Chainsaw, they were all bands that I knew of and was already sort of a fan of. But on Friday, I think what I found myself doing is seeing a lot more bands, just sort of going through the app, clicking on different profiles, because there's an app with a sort of full schedule you can sort of swipe across and see. So just sort of clicking on bands profiles, and if the name or the bio or the little audio snippet you can hear sort of sounds interesting, just going along. So yeah, I headed over to Chalk, which is a venue that I missed out on going to last year. I tried to get into Wonder Horse, couldn't get in. But yeah, got into Chalk and saw them. They were kind of like a sort of punky folk sort of band, but with sort of like very bombastic drums, and the lead singer sort of playing I believe it was a cello. Yeah, it was a cello. Sort of playing a cello while sort of singing, but they were sort of really cool, sort of like slightly weird, alternative-y, folky, punk-ish stuff. Quite difficult to sort of pin down, but they were sort of really fun, and I'm looking forward to sort of hearing a bit more of them because I didn't catch their full set. So I'm going to be listening to them on the train up, as I will be with a lot of these bands. So after that, I went to see a band called Hungry, who are Manchester-based, I believe. They're sort of like a sports team-esque sort of courting before they went auto-tuned sort of band. Really fun set, loads of energy. I saw this at Comedia Studio, which is one of my favourite venues of the shows I got to see last year. It's really nice, sort of intimate, but you sort of have a decent amount of space, and it's got like nice lighting and a sort of proper raised stage. So yeah, they were really fun, brought a lot of energy to the set. Then I grabbed some pizza to have some tea and headed down to the beach stage, which is, there was always a stage on the beach, but they've got a new biggest stage on the beach this year called the Deep End, where first I saw Rabbitfoot, who were really interesting. Like, they were sort of very intense. They had like a violinist. This has been a theme from this weekend, by the way. A lot of sort of classical instruments being brought into pop and alternative music and stuff that I've seen recently. But they had a sort of violinist, and then a sort of more stereotypical band set up, like synth, guitar, bass, drums. But their singer was incredibly captivating. Like, she had a real sense of sort of presence and sort of really balanced sort of like chaos and moving around with then like real fragility and earnestness in the lyrics and in the way that they sang. So yeah, really cool band. They are one of those bands who I sort of wish I'd heard their recorded music before hearing them live, because there was quite a lot sort of going on. They were very intense, lots of different parts, but so you almost want to sort of know what you're listening for in a little bit of a way. But again, another band that I will definitely be sort of listening through the back catalogue of on the way home. They really sort of brought in the audience, which I think we were saying this morning, can be quite difficult at an event like this, because you have a lot of sort of people from the industry and delegates and stuff who maybe in some cases just go to a gig as a place to meet up and chat, almost as if they're sort of more like a bar with live music as opposed to like a sort of proper gig. But they had the audience in the palm of their hand. They were really cool. I'm going to be listening to a lot more of them, I think. And yeah, I can't quite sort of pin down how to describe them genre-wise. I guess a little bit reminiscent of Mammal and Chainsaw, but definitely just have a listen to them, see for yourself, because they're quite difficult to describe. And then finally, one of the bands that I remember when I got the email to say I was going to be on this program, and I was absolutely buzzing. And then the next day, another wave of announcements came out about The Great Escape, and I literally just saw this email and was like, oh my god, I can't believe this, because English Teacher were headlining the sort of the what was it called, the Deep End stage, which I was already at for Rabbitfoot. They were headlining that stage for the Friday night, and I remember seeing the email, because they are a band who I sort of I feel like all music fans have this, where they feel like they sort of want to have that claim of like, oh, I've been interested in a band from the start, and I have been listening to them for a really long time. I got introduced to them while I was doing a little bit of sort of work experience at One Little Independent Records, and they were sort of being played around the office, and that was on their debut EP, and I've sort of been listening to them ever since. But the way they have absolutely exploded, both in terms of popularity and in terms of the quality of their music since their debut album, This Could Be Texas, which is obviously won a Mercury Prize. You don't need me to tell you that it is a really incredible album. So I was absolutely buzzing to see that they were playing. I've sort of missed them in Liverpool twice. I had a ticket for one and then couldn't make it, and then I was at home for another one. At home was in down in Kent as opposed to in Liverpool where I live. So we've crossed like ships in the night, I guess. So it was really great to finally see them. They put on a really, really good show. It was a slightly longer set because normally the sets of The Great Escape are half an hour, but they did 45. And yeah, absolutely fantastic. The whole crowd, the entire tent was packed out. The whole crowd were totally invested. You don't need me to tell you about English Teacher. I'm sure you know who English Teacher are. And if you don't, then you should get to know them because they are really, really fantastic. And so, yeah, that was the end of my Friday night. Really looking forward to today, and then I'll be heading home. So this is my last update from the Premier Inn in Brighton, which has been a lovely home for the last few days. When I've had sort of a spare 20 minutes because it's in such a great location. God, it sounds like an advert now, but it's in a really good location. So I've just sort of come back, even when I've had like 20 minutes in between some gigs, just come back, just lie down, just reset, and then go back out because, as I was saying, it's very intense. I've sort of done like over 20,000 steps every day I've been here. So, yeah, a couple of shows today. I had a little one-on-one earlier, but I will speak to you in the next place. Hi again, I'm back in Liverpool after getting back from Brighton and The Great Escape. Yeah, so Saturday was a lot less busy, to be honest. I think because a lot of people go to the conference for work, they go on the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday a lot more than they go on the Saturday. So felt a lot less busy around the conference and the gigs and stuff, but I did still get to do a little bit of stuff to report back on. So firstly, I went over to Horatio's on the pier, which is a venue I went to last year as well, one of my favourite venues in Brighton. It's just really different to any other venue that I've really been to before, to a venue literally on a pier. But I went to see, first I saw Ugly, who are honestly one of my favourite bands in the world at the moment. They are absolutely sensational. I saw them in Manchester only like a week or so ago, but I had to see them again. They are so good. Sort of slightly like proggy, folky kind of stuff. They're difficult to describe, to be honest, but their debut EP was absolutely fantastic. So definitely go and give them a listen. They're releasing sort of new stuff. They just got a new single, Next to Die, come out a month or so ago. So yeah, big things sort of coming from them and supposedly working on a new album. So really excited to hopefully hear that. And then straight after that, in the same venue, I saw Ladylike, who are a local band, I believe, in Brighton, and sort of really cool alternative, shoegazy, dream poppy type band. They've only got 2 songs out at the moment, but they're both excellent. And judging by their live set, they've got some even better songs, hopefully, to come in the not too distant future. So, yeah, Ladylike, definitely a band to look out for. They were playing a ton of shows. They played a few different Great Escape and All Escape shows over the course of the week. So, yeah, definitely a band to keep your eye on, Ladylike. Then I caught a panel that was being put on by BBC Introducing and Youth Music about pitching to press, which had a really great lineup of different people and different voices from different sort of areas of press. You know, you had sort of traditional sort of PR people, and then a radio plugger, and then someone who works for BBC Introducing. So a nice mix. And yeah, I think there was some really nice takeaways from this one. I think one of the things was, and this is a sort of common thread that you hear a lot of these kind of conferences, but just this idea of that a lot of people maybe sort of come across like an overnight success, but that there's, for every musician that's successful, there's so much work that's gone behind it. I think one of the panelists said that Miles Smith, who is someone who could be perceived as having been an overnight success, has had 24 tracks uploaded to BBC Introducing since 2017, and a lot of those have been played. So I guess the 2 takeaways there would be, firstly, get your music to BBC Introducing. It's a really great, easy platform and kind of a no-brainer, to be honest. Like, you may as well upload it. It's free to do, and a lot of the time, especially if you are in a less busy area, like if you're not in a city, it can be relatively accessible to actually get your music played there and start accessing some of their opportunities. The other thing I really liked is something that Elspeth Merry of Artist Way, a really great PR company, said, which was just, and this is a really great attitude to have, I think, is just that with sort of PR and press, she was talking about how there's a lot of sort of cold emailing and just sort of having to sort of hit and hope. And I think whilst I wouldn't sort of advise I had Rosanna on the podcast, Rosanna Connolly of Marina Comms, and we were talking about not doing the spray and pray. And I think that is true, that you should sort of tailor what you're saying and how you're pitching to magazines or blogs or playlists to the specific one, because that massively increases your chances. But at the same time, there is a real attitude of, that she was saying, of don't ask, don't get. So I think even if things seem ambitious or like they're not very realistic, like it's a playlist that's got sort of more followers than you typically get onto, or a magazine that typically features bigger artists, I think, there's a phrase that my friend says a lot, which is that you've got to get a ball in the box. And I think sometimes you need to sort of ask the question and try and take the opportunity, because it might be that your song is exactly what that playlist is looking for, or that your music or new album is exactly what the local magazine is looking for, and they need a new feature. So yeah, I think always with press, keep asking. As you said, don't ask, don't get. So sort of keep that mentality, and then with that mentality as well, you can sort of reframe that into when you're not successful in getting opportunities, that you were in the exact same position as you would be if you didn't apply in the first place. So just sort of keep pushing on and keep applying for things, I guess. But yeah, that was pretty much it. As I said, a much slower day on the Saturday, and I'd left a lot earlier. I didn't get to see any other gigs in the evening because I had to go home. But yeah, overall, I had an amazing experience at The Great Escape, and I hope you've enjoyed this sort of recap episode. And if you haven't already, definitely have a listen to the Sound City one, because it's a very similar thing, but with Liverpool Sound City. And yeah, I think I mentioned it in that one. I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier in this episode, but I was really keen when I started the podcast to be able to cover conferences and things like this, because it's one of the reasons that I started the podcast, is that a lot of conferences are very expensive to get to, are a little bit inaccessible. So, I mean, because of that, I want to thank everyone who sort of made the Elevate scheme possible. So Francine and Eve and Natalie and everyone at The Great Escape and Elevate who sort of made it happen. Everyone at Arts Council England who is sort of involved in the scheme, and also to you, the listeners, because I think if I wasn't sort of doing this podcast and speaking to you and having it sort of gain a bit of momentum now, I don't think that these opportunities would be coming my way. So thank you very much for listening and supporting the podcast. It really does mean an awful lot. And as long as if opportunities like this and future opportunities ever come, I'm always going to try my best to report back and make sure that that ethos of keeping things accessible through the podcast is never gonna change. So yeah, huge thank you to you for listening. Huge thank you to everyone involved in Elevate and all the other people that I did the program alongside as well. I made some really good friends doing this. So yeah, shout out to all of them. But hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will see you soon with another more regular interview episode.